The walk to the Thireland settlement wasn't long by distance, but Kale felt every step pull her deeper into something she didn't understand. Sanera moved like moonlight on ice, precise, fluid, untouchable. Kale stumbled once, favoring her ankle, but refused to complain. The trees around them whispered in a language she didn't know, though she sensed emotion from them, warning, grief, memory. Vines as wide as Kale's waist hung down from the thick bark trunks, moving faintly though there was no wind. Sanera glanced over her shoulder, her voice sharp but calm. "You hear the trees, human?" Kale blinked. "I feel them." Sanera slowed. That got her attention. "They grieve," Kale said simply. "They've seen too much fire. Too many bones." Sanera turned fully this time, brows slightly raised. "You speak like one of the old empath priests." Kale offered a small shrug. "Not a priest. Just cursed with too many feelings." That earned her a flash of something in Sanera's eyes, not quite amusement, but not dismissal either. They continued on in silence, until the trees thinned, and the air changed. Kale tasted iron and wind. The settlement came into view like a dreamscape unfurling, structures built into the trees themselves, spiral towers grown from bark, hanging lanterns that flickered with bioluminescent gel. A bridge made from braided vines arced across a ravine, its span wide enough for three to walk shoulder to shoulder. No doors. No walls. Just openness and tension. They were watched. Thireland people froze at Kale's arrival, some gasping audibly, others whispering as Sanera passed. Their eyes, iridescent, shifting shades of blue and copper, held wariness and something else. "Is she possessed?" one child asked loudly, pointing. "No," Sanera said, voice firm but not cruel. "She is something new." Kale glanced at her. "That's supposed to make me feel better." Sanera's lips almost twitched. "No. It is not meant to." They crossed into a wide circle formed by 5 trees braided together at the top. Within stood a pavilion of silk and stone. A fire pit glowed in the center, and beside it sat a man with age braided into his hair and time etched into his face. He didn't rise, but his presence expanded the moment Kale entered the ring. "Elder," Sanera said, bowing low. Kale followed suit, half guessing the protocol. "She comes from the skies. Her vessel broke the veil of our sacred field. She walked within morning flame's crater. And she lived." The elder looked at her like one might a fire that hadn't yet decided whether to warm or burn. "Your name?" he asked. "Kale Orion. Xenopsychologist. Empath." "I." "We know of your kind," he interrupted, voice deep and soft like carved stone. "We've traded with your consort worlds before. You map minds. Speak feelings. Tell me, Kale of Orion, did you speak to the beast?" Kale hesitated. The words didn't quite fit. "I didn't speak," she said. "But I felt. It's not mindless." The elder's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet it has left 54 of our hunters in ruin." "I didn't say it wasn't dangerous," she said quickly. "But it's grieving. It mourns like a soul unbound. That's not a predator. That's a heart turned feral." A long silence. Then the elder stood, his robes whispering like dry leaves. "Sanera. She stays with you." Sanera's brow furrowed. "Elder. Until she breaks or bonds, yes. The old law applies." Kale looked between them. "What law?" But no one answered. Later that night, Sanera led Kale to a tall nesting tree with spiral staircases carved into its outer bark. Her quarters were bare, only a cot woven from silkgrass and a shelf etched with crystal knives. "I'm not a prisoner," Kale said, watching Sanera unbuckle her shoulder guards. "No. You are a guest," Sanera said without looking. "But that does not make you safe." Kale frowned. You don't trust me. I don't trust that thing didn't mark you. The last one who stood in its path emerged only to bleed out in hours. She paused, turning to face Kale fully. You're still breathing. Laughing, even. That unsettles people. Kale met her gaze. Does it unsettle you? Sanera looked away, slicing an apple-like fruit with one of her knives. I trust instincts, not accidents. Kale walked to the open balcony, letting the night air cool her flushed skin. The trees murmured again, their low susurration like a sigh across dimensions. Below, lights floated in the mist, uncaged and wandering. You lost someone, Kale said softly, not looking at Sanera. To Viral. The silence behind her thickened. My brother, Sanera said finally, voice hollow. I'm sorry. No need. I loved him. But he died hunting something sacred. That was his choice. Kale turned. Do you think your brother would want more death in his name? Sanera didn't answer. Over the next few days, Kale wasn't confined, but watched. The Thyrlan watched her eat, speak, sit under their trees. She sketched diagrams in her old Earth notebook, mapping Viral's possible patrol routes from scent trails and claw marks. Sanera often stood nearby, arms crossed, pretending not to care. But Kale noticed how she leaned in when Kale described Viral's emotional pulse. Not its roar. Not its teeth. Its pain. This isn't a monster, Kale said one evening as they sat on a hanging platform overlooking the crater's rim. It's a relic. Something too old to be understood by war alone. Sanera stared into the mist. If you're right, then we have failed it. Kale turned to her, quiet. You don't strike me as someone who accepts failure. I don't. Sanera looked at her, really looked. Which is why I haven't turned you in. You could have. Sanera shrugged. Easily. But something keeps you here. Kale said nothing, but her heart beat faster under that stare. They sat in silence as two moons rose, one gold, one pale blue. I've read about bonds, Kale murmured. Your culture believes in soul complements. That when two energies align, it's sacred. Sanera nodded. Rare. Most never feel it. Kale hesitated. Have you? A long pause. I did. Once. But he died. My heart has been quiet since. Kale looked down. Maybe it wasn't quiet. Maybe it was waiting. Sanera turned to her sharply, something raw and alive in her expression. But before either of them could speak, a low sound broke the night. Not a roar. Not quite. A song of sorrow that echoed through the trees like breath and thunder. Kale stood. It's here. Sanera followed instantly, grabbing a light spear from her wall. Stay behind me. Kale didn't. They found it in the crater, again. Viral stood at the edge of the pool that had formed in the center of the crash-scorched valley. Its stripes glowed in moonlight, casting distorted reflections in the water. It was singing. Not with voice, but with movement. Each tilt of its head, each paw placed precisely in soft mud. A ritual. A memory. Kale stepped forward, heart aching. It's grieving again. Sanera watched, her weapon half lowered. For what? For someone it lost. Someone it was bonded to. Kale swallowed. Like you. Like your brother. Or maybe, like your once love. Viral turned its gaze toward her. And this time, it didn't vanish. It waited. Kale moved closer, her hand outstretched. Do you remember them? She whispered. Do you remember being more than pain? Sanera stood frozen behind her. Viral didn't growl. Didn't posture. It simply looked. Kale knelt. For a moment, everything, wind, moonlight, heartbeat, stilled. Then the beast stepped forward. Softly. Deliberately. It lowered its head. And nuzzled against Kale's palm. When Sanera was 6, her brother told her a lie. He said, "Monsters die when you look them in the eye." He had meant to comfort her. It was the night of her rites, the first hunt. She'd been small, even for a girl of her age, fingers too short to hold the ritual blade steady, breath too fast beneath the trees. And so he'd crouched beside her in the dark, brushing his knuckles against her cheek, and whispered that phrase. "Look it in the eye. See the fear in it. Not your own." He died 6 years later in the jaws of morning fire. Sanera never looked monsters in the eye after that. Until now. Kale Orion. The human was too soft. Too earnest. She smiled without guile, spoke like a wind that didn't know where it was blowing. She walked like someone who had never felt the weight of a warbound name. Yet she had stood within the beast's reach. And lived. That should not be possible. Sanera kept her distance at first. Watched from shadows as Kale ate fruit she didn't recognize, spoke to plants that didn't speak back, and sat for hours tracing lines in her little paper book like those lines held truths. Maybe they did. The human had a way of unraveling things, people, expectations, grief, just by sitting still long enough. She unsettled the tribe. Elders whispered. The younger hunters looked at Sanera as though expecting answers. But she had none. Only questions, all of them sharpened by something far more dangerous than curiosity. Desire. She hated the way Kale's voice made her chest tighten. She hated that she didn't hate it more. On the 4th night, Sanera found Kale by the western perch, staring at the night sky mist that poured from the forest valleys. Vines climbed the rails. Small blue orbs hovered beyond the trees, spirit flyers, drawn by emotion. Kale sat cross-legged, her back to the door. "You don't sleep much," Sanera said from the threshold. Kale looked up and smiled. "Neither do you." Sanera entered without asking, though her steps slowed as she neared. The air felt different near the human. Softer. Louder. She could feel Kale's presence like heat from a dying fire, lingering, comforting, hard to walk away from. "I wanted to ask you something," Kale said after a pause. "Then ask. What do you see when you look at me?" Sanera froze. A mistake, that question. Because the answer was, "I see something that reminds me I am still alive." Instead, she said, "I see someone who should not be here." Kale nodded, as if expecting that. But then she added, "And yet, I am." Silence stretched. "Your people see me as a threat. The beast too. But you look at me like you're waiting for me to prove something." Sanera sat beside her, arms resting on bent knees. She didn't speak for a while. She let the trees whisper, let the night press in around them. Then, "I don't know what you are yet, Kale. But you're not what you seem." Kale turned to her, searching her face. "And what do I seem?" Sanera met her gaze. There. In her eyes. The same fire that had once lived in Sanara's brother. The same softness she had sworn to bury. "You seem like someone I shouldn't want to know," Sanera said quietly. "But I do." The next day, they returned to the crater. Not alone this time. A small squad of Thireland scouts walked behind them, silent, armed, suspicious. Viral waited for them again. As if it had known. As if it had remembered. Kale approached first, slow and sure. She crouched at the edge of the blast-scorched earth, whispering words Sanera couldn't hear. Viral moved like breath on a knife's edge, powerful, deliberate. Its claws dug deep into the soil. Its breath misted in the air, warm and alive. And it looked at Sanera. Not Kale. Not the others. Her. Its eyes weren't predator's eyes. They were memory's eyes. Sanera didn't blink. She stepped forward. Just one pace. Kale rose, catching her wrist gently. Are you sure? No, Sanera whispered. But I'm done running from things I don't understand. Viral bowed its head. Not submission. Recognition. And Sanera understood, this was not a beast haunted by rage. This was a soul who remembered something it could no longer name. Just like her. Later, they sat together in the bathing springs, Kale and Sanera, shoulders touching as warm mineral steam rose around them. The air smelled of moss and crushed leaf. The moons were high above the canopy. I keep thinking I've seen everything, Kale murmured. But then I look at you and realize I haven't even started. Sanera looked at her slowly. The human's hair was wet, clinging to her neck. Her eyes glowed faintly in the blue light. Soft features. A strong mouth. Don't say things like that, Sanera said, voice quiet. Why? Because I want to believe you. Kale turned to her, face unreadable. Then, without speaking, she reached out. Brushed her fingers along the scar just beneath Sanera's collarbone. From the beast? Kale asked. No, from a human trader's blade. I was 15. Kale frowned. I'm sorry. Don't be. It healed, Sanera met her eyes again. They always do. Eventually. Kale didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in. The kiss wasn't soft. It was raw. Hesitant. Filled with all the unspoken things neither of them knew how to name. It tasted like river salt and regret. And something else. Something very, very new. When they pulled apart, neither looked away. We shouldn't, Sanera said, though her voice lacked conviction. But we did, Kale whispered. And neither said anything more. Back in her quarters, Sanera couldn't sleep. She dreamt of fire and teeth. Of the crater. Of Viral standing over her with not rage, but sorrow. And of Kale, reaching out across a silence too wide to cross. She woke with a gasp. And found Kale beside her. Not touching. Not speaking. Just there. And that was enough. The next day, everything changed. The council summoned them both. The elders stood beside a new arrival, another Thyrlan, this one cloaked in blood-red armor. Ambassador from the outer moons, the elder said. He brings grave news. The ambassador spoke slowly. The ruling council of the ruin has declared the crater sacred territory. It will be razed. The beast exterminated. No exceptions. Kale stepped forward. You can't. It's not just a predator. It's mourning something, someone. It's intelligent. It trusts us. A beast cannot trust, the man snapped. It is not a person. It is a mistake of nature. Sanera stepped beside her. Then I am a mistake too. Gasps. Whispers. Kale looked at her. I stood in its eyes, Sanera continued. And saw grief deeper than any of us have known. It is not what we think. The elder frowned. You risk your standing for a monster. No, she said, eyes flicking to Kale. I risk it for truth. And for what comes next. The chamber fell silent. And the elder sighed. You have one cycle, he said. If you can prove its intelligence, its memory, its heart, we will spare it. Sanera turned to Kale. Then we don't waste time. Lane Farrick had not spoken aloud in 16 cycles. Not because he couldn't. Not because he didn't know how. He simply had no one to speak to. The forest understood silence. And silence was all he had left. His exile had been a choice, at least, that's what they told the storybooks. The truth was Messier. Truth always was. He had stood in front of the old high seat, blood drying on his wrists, and when the high voice asked him to plead, Lane had simply said, "I tried to save her." And that was it. They exiled him not for failure, but for the audacity of mourning something no one else could bear to remember. Her name had been Ishari. His sister. His better half. His reason to breathe. And when she died, something old and sacred had broken with her. The creature. The protector. Viral. Lane heard them before they entered the grove. Soft steps. Too careful. Not patrols. He watched from above, one hand resting against the curved bark of a lightroot tree. The wood thrummed beneath his skin, its quiet warning vibrating like a heartbeat. Two people. Kale. The outsider, the empath. Too open for her own good. And Sanera. The exile's niece. Lane almost smiled. They found him where the moss grew thickest, his back against a tree older than the council itself. His eyes were closed, but he'd heard every whisper of their approach. "You look like a ghost," Sanera said, arms crossed. "You look like your mother," Lane replied without opening his eyes. She froze. Kale looked between them, cautious. "You're her uncle." Lane opened his eyes slowly. They were clouded with age but burned with clarity. "But you don't come all this way to revive old grief." Sanara's face tightened. "We come for the truth." Lane exhaled. "Truth," he repeated. "A cruel companion." Kale stepped forward, her voice low. "We need to know what happened." "To Viral. To your sister. The council wants to kill it. We're running out of time." Lane looked at her. And saw something he hadn't in years. Recognition. Not of face. Of soul. The fire was small that night, more ember than flame. Lane sat on a flat stone, the women beside him. He spoke like someone tearing muscle from memory. Every word cost him something. Every sentence was a scar reopened. Ishari was born with silence in her bones, he began. Not sadness. Not weakness. Silence. The kind that hears too much. "She was like me," Kale whispered. "No," Lane said. "She was like nothing. Not before, not since." He closed his eyes, the fire casting long shadows across his face. "When she was 10, the beast came. Not as hunter. As companion. It found her. Chose her. Marked her." Sanera listened without interrupting. "They were bonded," Lane said. "Not in the way we speak of soldiers and beasts. This was older. Sacred. Her emotions fed it. Her thoughts shaped it. Together, they healed the broken edges of the forest. Until the mines," Kale said softly. Lane nodded. "The mining crew desecrated the old rings. Tore up roots that should never have been touched. Ishari stood in their path. His voice cracked then. And died for it." The silence that followed was so full it felt like thunder. "Viral went mad," Lane continued. "But not mindless. No, it remembered her. Every scent. Every step. Every thought. And with her gone, it filled itself with the only thing it had left. Grief," Kale whispered. "Yes," Lane said. "Grief that kills. Grief that guards. Grief that cannot speak except with blood." Sanera knelt beside him, her voice quiet but strong. "You could have come back. You could have told them this years ago." "They wouldn't have listened," Lane said. "They didn't listen when I begged them not to cut through the southern roots. They buried the past. I buried myself." Kale reached out, laying her hand gently on his. "We're listening now." He looked at her hand, then into her eyes. "You've touched it. Haven't you?" Kale nodded. "More than once. It knows me." "Then maybe," maybe it can be saved. That night, Kale and Sanera lay beside each other in the temporary shelter Lane had constructed from woven reed and leaf. Neither slept. "I've never heard you talk about your family," Kale said softly, her fingers tracing idle patterns on Sanera's bare shoulder. "I don't," Sanera replied. "They're mostly ghosts now." Kale turned on her side. "You and Lane, you're alike." Sanera scoffed. "He abandoned the tribe. He grieved alone because no one else would grieve with him." Sanera didn't respond. But when Kale leaned closer, brushing her lips against the hollow of her throat, she didn't pull away. "You feel too much," Sanera murmured. "You feel too little," Kale whispered. Their lips met again, quieter this time. Not hunger. Not escape. Something softer. "When this is over," Sanera said, breathless, "will you still stay?" Kale looked at her like she'd asked if the stars would fall. "I think I'm already staying." The next morning, Lane led them deep into the ruins of the first sanctuary, what remained of the grove where Ishari had lived. Roots twisted in impossible shapes. Symbols carved into stone that no one remembered how to read. Bones lay beneath crystal leaves, cleaned by time, but never buried. And beside the bones, a gift. A necklace. Carved from one of Ishari's own songstones. "Vero brought it here," Lane whispered. "It remembers her," Kale said. "It honors her," Sanera corrected. They didn't need to say it aloud. They had proof now. Not of beast. Not of weapon. Of personhood. As they left the ruins, Viral appeared. Not as threat. Not as guardian. As griever. It walked slowly into the circle, nudged the bones gently, then turned its golden eyes to Kale. And knelt. Not out of submission. But trust. Kale stepped forward. So did Sanera. Together. And in that moment, the wind changed. The forest exhaled. And Lane, old and broken as he was, felt something inside him soften for the first time in decades. Hope. There was once music in the blood. A warmth beyond flesh. A shape beside the heart. A voice without sound. She was small when they first met. The one who hummed to trees. Who walked with open palms. Who knew to kneel before roots older than names. She was not prey. She was presence. He knew her scent before he knew her name. Knew the rhythm of her footsteps long before he understood that rhythm would become his own. Her name was Ishari. And when she smiled, he understood something most creatures never would. He was not alone. He became more than muscle. He learned gentleness. His teeth knew battle, but his breath knew stillness. He guarded her when the wind turned cruel. Followed her when the earth wept open. Mourned birds with broken wings and creatures caught in hunters' snares. She taught him the shape of mercy. And he, in turn, gave her strength. They were not beast and rider. Not handler and weapon. They were bonded. A tether of soul to soul, strung through the pulse of the forest. The others didn't understand. Not even her brother, though he watched with awe and quiet jealousy. They said, "It's a spirit in beast flesh. It will turn. All things wild must break." And so they broke her first. The fire that took her didn't roar. It whispered. Machines with metal teeth. Men with cold hands. The stink of minerals torn from sacred roots. And she stood in their path with eyes wide and heart bared. She screamed his name. Not aloud. Through their bond. Through that fragile, perfect thread that tied them across any distance. And he came. Faster than sound. But not fast enough. They shot her down. And when she fell, something ancient inside him shattered. The silence that followed was eternal. Not the silence of windless groves or sleeping rivers. A silence of absence. A silence of unbeing. She was gone. And all he had left was rage. For 16 cycles, he hunted. Not for food. For memory. He carved his grief into bark and bone. Left the blood of hunters as warnings. Buried her necklace beneath her favorite tree. Sang songs of mourning to the trees who still remembered her laugh. But no one listened. Not until her. The small one. Kale. Not of this world. Not of the bond. Not shaped by root or ritual. But when she touched the earth, he felt her pain. When she bled, he felt her fear. And when she opened her palm to him, empty, trembling, but unafraid, he felt something else. Familiarity. She did not smell like Ishari. Did not move like her. But she carried the same ache. And that was enough. He tested her. Watched her. Circled her camps. She did not run. Did not bare her teeth. She simply waited. Like Ishari had waited. And the one beside her, Sanera, had anger. Yes. But also strength. Honor. The kind he remembered from the brother. They were broken, these two. But so was he. And somehow, their brokenness fit. When Kale touched his muzzle, he did not flinch. When she whispered, "You are not alone," he believed her. When Sanera stood unarmed beside her, he began to forgive. Not them. Himself. For surviving. He led them to the shrine. He let them see the bones. The necklace. Let them feel what he had carried in silence. And they did not mock it. Did not pity him. They grieved with him. That was when he began to change. Thoughts began to shape. Not instincts. Words. Not like theirs. Not sound-bound or throat-borne. But words still. She remembers. She hears. She stays. He did not know what this meant. Only that when Kale returned to the grove each morning, the ache in his chest lessened. And when she smiled, truly smiled, he felt something like birdsong. Softness. Safety. Return. And then came the voices. The others. The ones who said, "Kill it. End it. It is a monster." He watched from the trees. Heard their plan. They would come at dawn. With blades of fire and hearts of fear. They would not listen. But Kale would. And Sanera. He must warn them. He must make them see. But how do you speak when you were never taught how to speak? You remember. You remember the bond. You remember what it felt like to be held. To be seen. To be named. And you try. He ran that night. Not with stealth. With purpose. He found Kale on the cliff's edge, her back to the wind. She turned. And for the first time, he tried to shape the memory into more. He knelt. He placed his paw over his chest. And looked her in the eye. Not beast to handler. Not predator to prey. Soul to soul. I remember. The word was not spoken. But she heard it. She gasped. Reached out. Touched his head. And whispered, "I remember too."